Well, hello. Welcome to my office today. Boy, it is getting really nice outside, and I am getting stir crazy, ready to be done with this quarantine, and looking forward to seeing you guys again really soon. Okay, well, we're at now a turning point in the book of Genesis. I've talked about chapters 1 through 11 as the mythological section of this book. So it explores why the world is the way it is by telling stories about the way things never were, but always are, right? The remainder of the book is an historical narrative that follows one family through 4 generations. Now, when I say historical narrative, I don't mean to suggest that everything, or I don't know, even anything in Genesis 12 to 50 is historically factual or that it happened in the way that it's described. I just mean that that's the genre we're dealing with now. For the most part, you're not going to see any more talking animals or giants or other kind of mythological elements like that. Okay, so since we're at this nice kind of breaking point, let's just take a moment to quickly recap the first 11 chapters. We began with the creation of the whole world as a cosmic mountain on which heaven and earth overlap and interlock, the garden temple of God, and we human beings as the gardener priests, tasked with dispensing the life giving energy of God to the whole world. That is, until Adam and Eve tried to seize for themselves that uniquely divine authority to name good and bad. And as a result, they cut us off from the source of that life giving divine energy. So there's a personal element to the problem, the conflict of this story. You and I, as represented by our primordial ancestors, have a tendency to reach out and to try to seize control for ourselves. God's plan to restore God's good creation and to make available again their life giving energy is about to be revealed through this family history. But we don't have the patience for something like that. We instead try once again to take control of the situation ourselves. We build a counterfeit cosmic mountain, a Tower of Babel, and we try to reunite heaven and earth on our own terms. But by this time, there's a social element as well. The Tower of Babel is a coordinated scheme. It's a collusion of human greed, aided by the development of a new technology, the brick. That's why, to stop it, God confuses their language. It's figurative of dismantling the social structures that make this conspiratorial seizure of power possible. And finally, we look to that very strange story of some heavenly beings, the sons of God or the Watchers, doing the same thing, trying to reunite heaven and earth on their own terms. So the problem or the conflict of the story is personal and social and even cosmic. That's worth remembering because it'll become important later on in this study. Well, that's enough of that. On to Abraham and his family. We begin by reading from Genesis chapter 12. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." When God called Abram to go from your father's house to the land that God would show him, it wasn't like a teenager deciding to head off to college or career. The challenge is to leave his social unit, which, in the absence of any centralized governance, really provides the basic social welfare and security needs. It's to quit the family business, to leave the family's land that stood also as its 401k. Most of all, it's to leave behind the family's gods and goddesses, to renounce the familial religion, and to step into a brand new way of imagining the world. There's some lore about Abraham that you can read kind of in various versions in both Jewish Midrash and in the Quran, that the night before he left his father's house for that far-off country, he snuck in the cover of night into his father's statuary, where the family gods and goddesses were kept. And with a wooden staff, knocked over and smashed to pieces all of the statues except for one. And then he slid the staff into the hand of that one remaining god, curled up on the couch, and went to sleep. When Abraham's father came the next morning to discover his statues destroyed, he said, "What has happened here?" To which Abraham replied, "Well, I think it's pretty clear what happened here." Abram's father said, No, this can't be. These statues aren't alive. They're made of wood and stone and bronze. I built them myself." And Abraham said, "Then why do you bow to them?" Okay, so this is a story about how Abraham leaves behind kind of the world that he was a part of. Notice the structure of this passage as well. Abram is chosen by God from among all the peoples of the world. We're not given any insight into why this might be the case. Now, we Methodists, of course, follow the teachings of John Wesley, who famously rejected, for good or for ill, I won't really get into it here, but he rejected the Christian doctrine of election, the idea that God makes choices, chooses some people or groups of people out from among others. And it's for good reason. Wesley saw that the Christian West, ever since St. Augustine in the 4th century and all through the Middle Ages, really, right up through Protestant theology, the doctrine of election really was bad news. I mean, it wasn't bad news for everybody, right? If you're among the elect, that is, if you're a Christian, then election is really good news for you. It means you are chosen and beloved of God, that you have a secure place in heaven when you die. But if you're not among the elect, well, then it's really bad news. But that's not at all the way that election works in the Bible. You see it in this passage that we just read, and we'll see it throughout the book of Genesis. This is a theme that we'll return to again and again as we work through the narrative portion of this book. Abraham is chosen, elect, not for his own sake, but for the sake of the non-elect. Remember, I will make you a great nation. And I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. And in you all the earth shall be blessed. It's as though that life-giving divine energy that flowed out from the center of the garden temple, but which we've now been cut off from because we tried to seize for ourselves the control of the divine authority to name good and bad, that will now flow out instead from this family, this great nation that God has promised will come from Abram. So that's the structure of election in the Bible. Some are chosen not at the expense of others, but for the sake of others. Okay, let's flip ahead a little bit to Genesis chapter 15, just a couple of pages. After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great." But Abram said, "O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless. The heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus." And Abraham said, "You have given me no offspring. So a slave born in my house is to be my heir." God promised that Abram would be a great nation, but that was nearly 20 years ago. And the promises of Genesis 12 show no sign of being fulfilled. If you're going to be a great nation, you need descendants and you need land. Abram has neither. At this point, his meager estate will be passed down to his slave. So God takes Abram outside and says, "Look up at the heavens. Count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And look out at all the land as far as your eye can see. All that will be yours." By the way, if you're following along, look down at verse 12. It tells you that this exchange takes place when the sun is getting ready to go down. That means God took Abram out to count the stars in the full light of day. What a subtle detail added by this masterful writer. Abraham is being asked to believe in promises yet to be fulfilled, and to count stars he cannot yet see. But of course, Abram asks what anyone in this situation would ask. how do I know? And God replies to this question just the way you'd expect them to reply. Bring me a heifer. Wait, what? Bring me a heifer? What kind of response is this? It sounds super weird to us, but it turns out that for ancient Near Easterners, this reading would have been totally natural response. God is asking Abram to enter into a covenant. Now, in English, the word covenant has taken on a specifically religious connotation, not so in its original context. In Abram's world, the covenant, berith in Hebrew, was the standard form of of a business merger, a prenuptial agreement, a political alliance. In other words, if you needed to be able to trust someone to hold up their end of a bargain, you'd make a berith. Today, we just have a contract like that notarized so that there are enforceable legal ramifications for not keeping your word. But in Abram's day, in the absence of a more formalized legal system, they resorted instead to ritually significant threats. So for instance, in the covenant ceremony like the one that we see in Genesis 15, you cut animals in half immediately from head to buttocks. Abraham is told to do this with a heifer, a female goat, and a ram. And then you arrange the pieces end to end with an aisle down the middle for both parties to walk through, like the world's most horrific red carpet. The idea, very tangibly displayed, is if you don't hold up your end of the bargain, may this same bloody fate befall you. Doing it this way is called cutting a covenant. This notion even finds its way into English. We talk about cutting a deal. There are other ways to make the same kind of point, of course. There's another story later in Genesis that depicts Abraham making a covenant with one of his slaves. And he has him, quote, "Put your hand under my thigh." Some commentators think that thigh here is euphemistic for testicles. Again, so as to say, very tactily, if you don't keep your end of the bargain, bad things could happen to you, right? So Abraham asks, "It's been 20 years, God. How do I know you're going to keep your promise?" And God says, "Bring me a heifer." So Abram does. He gets the heifer and the female goat and the ram, also a couple of birds that are part of the ceremony for reasons that are no longer understood. And he cuts the animals in half and arranges them just so. It's a lot of work and it's a big bloody mess. And Abram keeps having to stop to drive away the buzzards. And when it's all done, he falls asleep. And as Abram sleeps, a smoking fire pot appears. This is what theologians call a theophany. It's a physical manifestation of God's glory, or the weightiness of God's presence. In the Bible, God's glory often manifests as fire, cloud, smoke, or light. Think of Moses and the burning bush, or the cloud descending on Mount Sinai, or the Israelites being led through the wilderness by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. Think, since we're coming up on Pentecost Sunday, of the tongues of fire resting on the apostles. So, as Abraham sleeps, the glory of God appears in the form of a smoking pot and passes through the animals. As if to say, it doesn't matter, Abram, whether you keep your covenant or not. No matter how hard you try, and boy, will Abram's family try, you cannot screw this up. I, God, will remain faithful to my covenant promises to dispense my blessing, my life-giving energy to the world through you. Well, there's a lot more to say about Abram. We'll keep following his story a couple of weeks, but I think that's enough for today. Until next time.